The thunderous sound of hooves pounding against the dusty earth rumbled across the plains as Owen Quinn raced his chestnut stallion toward Oatman, Arizona territory. The year was 1879, and the unforgiving sun beat down on his broad shoulders as he adjusted his worn Stetson. Had a faithful companion that had weathered 5 harsh winters alongside him. Blood trickled from a bullet graze on his left arm, but Owen didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to, not with the Prescott gang still somewhere behind him. The small mining town of Oatman appeared on the horizon, its handful of buildings shimmering like a mirage in the desert heat. Owen had been riding for 2 days straight, stopping only to rest his horse and catch a few hours of sleep under the stars. The gold shipment information he carried in his saddlebag was too valuable to risk falling into the wrong hands. As he approached the town limits, Owen slowed his stallion to a trot. The main street was alive with the usual bustle of a mining community, prospectors drinking away their hopes or sorrows, traders hawking wares, and the occasional respectable citizen going about their business. He guided his horse to the hitching post outside the Oatman Hotel, the most reputable establishment in this dusty corner of the Arizona territory. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured, patting the horse's sweat-slicked neck before dismounting. His boots hit the ground with a thud that sent a cloud of dust swirling around his spurs. Owen winced as he reached for his saddlebag, the wound on his arm protesting the movement. The Oatman Hotel stood 2 stories tall, its wooden facade weathered but well-maintained. Owen took a moment to check his surroundings, eyes scanning the street for any sign of pursuit. Satisfied that he'd put enough distance between himself and the Prescott gang, he pushed through the swinging doors of the hotel. The interior was dimly lit compared to the harsh glare outside, and it took Owen's eyes a moment to adjust. A few heads turned his way, a natural reaction to a newcomer in a small town, but most quickly returned to their drinks or conversations. The bartender, a burly man with a thick mustache, gave him a cursory nod. Owen responded in kind but didn't approach the bar. Instead, he made his way to a corner table where he could keep his back to the wall and his eyes on the entrance. He sat down heavily, the exhaustion of the past 2 days settling into his bones. His hat remained firmly on his head, as it always did. Owen Quinn had fought in the war between the states, had ridden with the Texas Rangers, and now worked as a courier for Wells Fargo. Through it all, he'd held to one steadfast rule: a cowboy never removed his hat indoors. His father had taught him that removing your hat meant letting your guard down, and in the unforgiving terrain of the West, that was an invitation to death. "Coffee," he called to a passing server, his voice gravelly from dust and disuse. The server, a young boy not more than 15, nodded and scurried off. Owen leaned back in his chair, allowing himself to relax slightly but keeping his senses alert. The wound on his arm needed tending, but that could wait until he had some caffeine to clear the fog from his mind. The coffee arrived quickly, steaming hot and black as pitch. Owen wrapped his calloused hands around the mug, savoring the warmth before taking a cautious sip. It was bitter and strong, exactly what he needed. The door to the hotel swung open again, and Owen's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip. But instead of the rough-looking men he'd been expecting, a woman stepped through. She wasn't like the saloon girls or the hardy wives of miners that populated Oatman. This woman carried herself with a grace that seemed out of place in the dusty frontier town. Her traveling dress was simple but well-made, a deep blue that complemented her fair skin. Chestnut hair was pinned up neatly beneath a modest hat, though a few rebellious tendrils had escaped to frame her face. Owen watched as she spoke briefly with the hotel proprietor, who gestured toward the dining area. She nodded her thanks and turned, her eyes surveying the room before landing on his corner table, the only one with an empty chair. She approached with determined steps, stopping a respectful distance from his table. "Pardon me, sir," she said, her voice carrying a hint of Eastern refinement. "The hotel seems quite full this evening. Would you mind terribly if I shared your table for supper?" Owen studied her for a moment, Her green eyes met his without wavering, showing a courage that belied her genteel appearance. After a moment's consideration, he nodded toward the empty chair across from him. "Much obliged," he said simply. "Thank you, I'm Beatrice Palmer," she offered as she settled into the chair, arranging her skirts with practiced ease. "Owen Quinn," he replied, touching the brim of his hat in acknowledgement but not removing it. A flicker of something, perhaps amusement or curiosity, crossed her features at his gesture, but she made no comment on his manners or lack thereof. "What brings you to Oatman, Miss Palmer?" Owen asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. He wasn't one for idle conversation, but something about her made him want to hear her speak again. "I've come to teach at the new schoolhouse," she replied, removing her gloves one finger at a time. "The town council wrote that the children of Oatman are in desperate need of proper education." Owen raised an eyebrow. "Oatman's a rough place for a schoolteacher." "So I've been warned, Mr. Quinn. But I believe education is important everywhere, perhaps especially in rough places as you call them." There was a quiet determination in her voice that surprised him. Before he could respond, the server appeared again to take her order. Beatrice requested a simple meal of beef stew and bread, which Owen realized was exactly what his empty stomach needed as well. "Make that too," he told the boy, who nodded and disappeared toward the kitchen. "And what is your business in Oatman?" Beatrice asked, turning her attention back to Owen. He hesitated. His work as a Wells Fargo courier wasn't exactly a secret, but he wasn't in the habit of sharing details with strangers, no matter how intriguing they might be. "Just passing through," he said finally. "On my way to Prescott." She seemed to sense his reluctance and didn't press further. Instead, she glanced around the hotel dining room, taking in the mixed clientele with open curiosity. "It's different from what I expected," she admitted. "Larger, more established." Owen followed her gaze. The Oatman Hotel was certainly one of the nicer establishments he'd encountered in his travels, with its solid wooden tables and oil lamps casting a warm glow over the room. Still, it was a far cry from the refined establishments of the East that she was likely accustomed to. "Wait until you see the rest of the town," he said, a hint of wry amusement in his tone. Their food arrived, steaming and fragrant. Owen realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a proper meal. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the simple fare tasting better than any fancy restaurant meal after days of hard riding. "Your arm is injured," Beatrice observed suddenly, her eyes fixed on the tear in his shirt sleeve where dried blood had crusted around the fabric. Owen glanced down as if noticing it for the first time. "It's nothing, brush with a cactus." Her expression told him she didn't believe his excuse for a moment, but again, she didn't press. Instead, she reached into her small handbag and withdrew a clean handkerchief. "At least let me help you clean it," she offered, dipping the cloth into her water glass. "Infections out here can be deadly from what I've read." Owen hesitated. He wasn't accustomed to accepting help, especially not from women he'd just met. But there was something about Beatrice Palmer that made refusal seem both impossible and unnecessary. He extended his arm across the table, allowing her to push up his sleeve and examine the wound. Her touch was gentle but efficient as she dabbed away the dried blood. "This isn't from a cactus, Mr. Quinn," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his with a knowing look. "This is a bullet graze." Owen didn't respond, but his silence was confirmation enough. "I have some antiseptic in my trunk upstairs," she continued, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "It would prevent infection better than water." "Why would a schoolteacher carry antiseptic?" he asked, genuinely curious. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "My father was a doctor during the war. He taught me that preparation is essential, especially when venturing into territories where medical care might be scarce." Their eyes locked across the table, and Owen felt something shift in the air between them. There was more to Beatrice Palmer than met the eye, just as there was more to his bullet wound than a brush with a cactus. For the first time in years, Owen Quinn felt the urge to remove his hat in the presence of another person. The thought startled him so much that he abruptly pulled his arm back, breaking the connection between them. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Palmer, but I can tend to it myself," he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. If she was offended by his sudden withdrawal, she didn't show it. Instead, she nodded once and returned to her meal, allowing him the space he seemed to need. As they finished eating, the hotel began to fill with more patrons, the noise level rising with each new arrival. Owen noticed Beatrice's subtle discomfort at the rowdier elements, though she tried to hide it behind polite smiles. "The schoolhouse, have you seen it yet?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. She shook her head. "I only arrived on the afternoon stage. The hotel proprietor said someone would show me tomorrow." Owen nodded, considering. The thought of this refined woman navigating Oatman alone didn't sit well with him. The town might be established, as she'd put it, but it was still the frontier, with all the dangers that entailed. "I could show you," he found himself offering. "In the morning, before I continue to Prescott." Beatrice's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but a genuine smile soon followed. "That would be most kind, Mr. Quinn, if you're certain it's not an imposition." "I'm headed that direction anyway," he lied. The schoolhouse was on the opposite end of town from the route to Prescott, but something compelled him to make the offer nonetheless. "Then I accept," she said, her smile warming her entire face in a way that made Owen suddenly very aware of his dusty clothes and unshaven face. A commotion at the hotel entrance drew their attention. 4 men had entered, their clothes trail-worn and their expressions hard. Owen recognized them immediately, the Prescott gang, or at least some of them. They'd caught up faster than he'd anticipated. "Miss Palmer," he said quietly, keeping his face carefully neutral, "I believe it's getting late. Perhaps you should retire to your room." Beatrice followed his gaze to the newcomers, her expression sharpening with understanding. "Perhaps you're right, Mr. Quinn." She rose gracefully, gathering her small handbag. "Thank you for sharing your table. I look forward to our tour tomorrow." Owen stood as well, tipping his hat slightly. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, she confirmed with a nod before making her way toward the stairs that led to the hotel's upper floor. Owen watched her go, making sure she was safely out of sight before returning his attention to the men at the entrance. They hadn't spotted him yet, their attention focused on securing drinks and information. He needed to move quickly while he still had the advantage of surprise. Leaving payment for the meals on the table, Owen slipped through the back exit of the hotel dining room, emerging into the alley behind the building. The night air was cool against his face as he made his way to the stables where Thunder was being kept. The stable boy was half asleep when Owen entered, but roused quickly at the sight of coins in the cowboy's hand. "I need him ready to ride in 5 minutes, Owen instructed, gesturing toward his chestnut stallion. The boy nodded eagerly, pocketing the money and moving to prepare the horse. Owen used the time to check his saddlebags, ensuring the valuable documents were still secure. He had to get them to Prescott, but now he'd need to take a different route. As the stable boy worked, Owen found his thoughts drifting to Beatrice Palmer. He'd made her a promise about tomorrow when he now couldn't keep. The realization bothered him more than it should have after such a brief acquaintance. "She'll understand," he muttered to himself. "She's smart enough to know what those men are." Still, as Thunder was let out, saddled and ready to go, Owen hesitated. He'd never been one to break his word, especially not to a lady. But staying in Oatman with the Prescott gang in pursuit wasn't just dangerous for him, it could put others at risk too, including the new schoolteacher. With a resigned sigh, Owen mounted his horse and rode out into the darkness, taking a seldom-used trail that would eventually loop back toward Prescott. The important thing was getting the documents to safety. Personal feelings had no place in his line of work. Yet as Thunder's hooves pounded against the hard desert earth, Owen couldn't shake the image of Beatrice Palmer's green eyes or the gentle way she'd tended to his wound. For the first time in years, he felt a pang of regret at leaving a town behind. Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon when Owen realized he was being followed. The sound was subtle, just the occasional displacement of rocks that didn't match Thunder's rhythm, but years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. Someone was tracking him, and they were good at it. He kept his pace steady, giving no indication that he'd noticed the pursuit. The trail he'd chosen wound through a series of rocky outcroppings that provided plenty of cover for an ambush. If he could make it past them to the open desert beyond, he'd have a better chance of outrunning whoever was behind him. Thunder sensed his tension and responded with increased alertness, ears flicking back and forth as they navigated the narrow path. Owen kept one hand near his revolver, eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. The attack came just as he'd expected, at the narrowest point of the trail where towering rocks created a natural bottleneck. Two riders appeared suddenly, blocking the path ahead while the sounds of pursuit grew louder behind. Owen drew his revolver in one fluid motion, but before he could fire, a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Quinn, wait." He turned in his saddle, disbelief washing over him as he recognized the figure approaching on horseback. Beatrice Palmer, her hair now in a practical braid and her traveling dress replaced by a split-riding skirt, was following him. And beside her, equally improbable, was the hotel proprietor armed with a shotgun. "Miss Palmer," Owen lowered his gun slightly, confusion evident in his voice. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" "Saving your life, it appears," she replied, bringing her horse alongside his. "Mr. Thornton here says those men who came to the hotel last night have been asking about you all over town. They're offering quite a reward." The hotel proprietor nodded grimly. "Bad business, Quinn. They're saying you stole something valuable from them." Owen's jaw tightened. "They're lying." "I'm carrying documents for Wells Fargo legal documents. Those men are the Prescott gang wanted in 3 territories." "I figured as much," Thornton said. "That's why I helped the lady here find you. Didn't seem right, leaving you to face them alone when you've done nothing wrong." Owen looked at Beatrice with new appreciation. "How did you know to trust him?" "I didn't," she admitted. "But when I saw those men searching the hotel after you left, I knew you were in danger. Mr. Thornton caught me trying to follow you and offered his assistance. He said he's known you from previous visits." "We need to move," Owen said, suddenly aware that they were still dangerously exposed. "Those riders ahead aren't friendly." As if to confirm his words, a shot rang out, the bullet striking rock just inches from Thunder's hooves. The horse reared, but Owen quickly brought him under control. "There's another trail," Thornton said urgently. "It branches off about 100 yards back, rougher terrain, but it'll take us around to the Prescott Road from the east." Owen nodded. "Lead the way." The 3 of them wheeled their horses around and galloped back the way they'd come, bullets kicking up dust behind them. Thornton veered off onto an almost invisible trail that cut between 2 large boulders, and Owen followed, with Beatrice close behind. The new path was indeed rougher, forcing them to slow their pace as they navigated loose stones and steep inclines. Owen found himself constantly looking back to check on Beatrice, impressed despite himself at her skilled horsemanship. Where did a schoolteacher learn to ride like that? He called back to her during a relatively smooth stretch. "My father's practice covered 20 miles of Maryland countryside," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "I learned to ride before I could walk properly." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of pursuit. The Prescott gang had found their trail and was gaining ground. "There's an old mining cabin up ahead," Thornton shouted over his shoulder. "We might be able to hold them off there until help arrives." "What help?" Owen asked skeptically. "I sent my boy to alert the marshal before we left town," Thornton explained. "With any luck, he and his deputies are already on their way." The cabin appeared around the next bend, a dilapidated structure of rough-hewn logs that had seen better days. Its location, however, was defensible, backed against a cliff face with good visibility of the surrounding area. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses around to the back of the cabin, where a small lean-to provided some shelter. Owen helped Beatrice down, noticing the determination in her eyes despite the dangerous situation. "You should have stayed in town," he told her as they hurried inside the cabin. Perhaps, she agreed, but then you'd be facing them alone. I'm used to being alone, he replied, checking the ammunition in his revolver. Beatrice's expression softened slightly. No one should have to be alone when facing danger, Mr. Quinn. There was no time to respond as the sound of approaching horses demanded their attention. Thornton took position at one of the cabin's 2 windows, while Owen stationed himself at the other. Beatrice stayed back, but Owen noticed she had withdrawn a small derringer from her bag, another surprise from the supposedly proper schoolteacher. They're splitting up, Thornton reported, watching as the riders circled the clearing in front of the cabin. 4 of them total. Owen counted the same. They'll try to surround us. We need to make it clear that coming closer will cost them. He aimed carefully and fired a warning shot that struck the ground near the lead rider's horse. The animal spooked, nearly throwing its rider, who cursed loudly. "Quinn," a voice bellowed from the clearing, "we know you're in there. Hand over the documents and we'll let you and your friends live." "Prescott," Owen called back. "Those documents prove your land claims are fraudulent. Your wanted men, the marshal's on his way." A barrage of gunfire was their answer, bullets splintering the wood around the cabin windows. Owen and Thornton ducked for cover, then returned fire in measured bursts, conserving ammunition. Beatrice had taken shelter behind an overturned table, her small derringer clutched in steady hands. When a lull in the shooting came, she spoke up. "Mr. Quinn, how many bullets do you have?" 12 in the revolver, another dozen in my belt, he answered, impressed by her practical question. "I have 8 left in the shotgun," Thornton added, "and my rifle has a full load of 15. Beatrice nodded, calculating. If the marshal is coming from Oatman, he'd take the main trail. That would bring him in from the south. Perhaps we could create a diversion in that direction, draw their attention." Owen and Thornton exchanged surprised looks. "What kind of diversion?" Owen asked. "The lean-to behind the cabin," she suggested. "If we could set it alight, the smoke would be visible for miles. It might make them think reinforcements are already here." "It would give away our only shelter for the horses," Thornton pointed out, "but it might save our lives," Owen countered. "It's a good plan." A new volley of bullets interrupted their discussion, one coming dangerously close to where Beatrice was sheltering. Owen moved instinctively, positioning himself between her and the window. "Stay low," he instructed, his voice tense with concern. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the danger they shared and the trust that had formed so quickly between strangers. "I'll circle around to the back," Thornton said, breaking the moment. "See if I can reach the lean-to without being spotted." "It's too dangerous," Owen argued. "They'll have someone watching the rear by now." "I know these mountains better than they do," Thornton insisted. "There's a depression behind the cabin that gives cover almost to the lean-to. I can make it." Before Owen could protest further, the older man was moving, staying low as he made his way toward the cabin's back door. "Be careful," Beatrice called after him softly. Left alone with Beatrice, Owen felt a strange mix of protectiveness and admiration. She was holding up remarkably well under pressure, her fear evident but controlled. "Where did you learn about diversionary tactics?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the clearing where the Prescott gang had taken cover among the rocks. "My father served as a field surgeon during the war," she explained. "He would tell me stories of battles and strategies. I always listened carefully." "Most ladies would faint at such tales," Owen observed. A small smile touched her lips. "I'm not most ladies, Mr. Quinn." "No," he agreed, meeting her gaze. "You certainly are not." Another round of gunfire peppered the cabin, and Owen returned fire, managing to hit one of the gang members in the shoulder. The man fell back with a cry, and his companions pulled him to better cover. "That's bought us some time," Owen said, reloading quickly. "They'll be more cautious now." A moment later, a shout from outside drew their attention. Thornton had been spotted as he neared the lean-to. Gunfire erupted, and they heard the older man cry out in pain, "Mr. Thornton." Beatrice gasped, starting to rise. Owen caught her arm. "Wait, I'll cover you." He moved to the window and began firing rapidly at the men who had spotted Thornton, forcing them to duck for cover. "Go now, stay low." Beatrice nodded and darted toward the back door, her movements swift and purposeful. Owen continued providing covering fire, his heart pounding with fear for both Thornton and Beatrice. Through the back window, he could see Beatrice reach Thornton, who was clutching his leg but still conscious. Together, they dragged themselves to the relative safety of the depression he'd mentioned. Owen breathed a sigh of relief when they disappeared from view, but it was short-lived as the gang members renewed their assault on the cabin. With Thornton and Beatrice temporarily safe but separated from him, Owen found himself in an increasingly desperate position. His ammunition wouldn't last forever, and the Prescott gang showed no signs of retreating. "Quinn," Prescott's voice called out again, "your friends are trapped back there. Surrender now or we'll burn them out." Owen didn't respond, knowing any answer would only confirm their suspicions about Beatrice and Thornton's location. Instead, he moved silently to the back of the cabin, hoping to catch a glimpse of them. He spotted movement in the depression. Beatrice was treating Thornton's wound, tearing strips from her petticoat to bandage his leg. The hotel proprietor seemed to be instructing her about something, gesturing toward the lean-to. Owen realized they were still planning to create the diversion. Thornton couldn't move further, but he was handing Beatrice something. Matches, most likely. She was going to attempt to reach the lean-to alone. No, Owen muttered under his breath. It was too dangerous if they spotted her. Before he could signal her to stop, Beatrice was moving, keeping low in the depression until it ended about 10 feet from the lean-to. She paused there, gathering her courage. Owen made a split-second decision. Moving back to the front window, he fired several shots in rapid succession, drawing the gang's attention fully to the cabin. Then, while they were focused on returning fire, he slipped out the back door and sprinted toward Beatrice. He reached her just as she was preparing to make her dash to the lean-to. "What are you doing?" she hissed, startled by his sudden appearance. "Helping," he replied simply. "We'll go together on my count." Her eyes searched his face for a moment, then she nodded. "Ready when you are. 3, 2, 1. Now, they burst from cover together, running full tilt toward the wooden structure. Shots rang out almost immediately, but they were wild and hurried. Owen and Beatrice reached the lean-to intact, diving inside among the startled horses. "The hay," Beatrice gasped, catching her breath. "It will create enough smoke." Owen nodded, gathering a small pile near the back of the structure, away from the horses. "We'll need to free them first." Working quickly, they untied the horses and led them a safe distance away. Then, while Owen stood guard, Beatrice struck a match and set the hay ablaze. The dry material caught quickly, smoke beginning to rise toward the clear blue sky. It would be visible for miles, just as Beatrice had predicted. "Back to Thornton now," Owen directed, keeping himself between her and the gunmen as they retreated to the depression where the injured man waited. "It's working," Thornton said as they rejoined him, pointing toward the confusion among the Prescott gang. Some were arguing about whether to retreat, while others insisted on pressing the attack. The moment of indecision gave them the opportunity they needed. Owen helped Thornton to his feet, supporting him on one side while Beatrice took the other. Together, they began making their way along the depression, which curved around toward the eastern trail. "If we can reach the horses, we might be able to make it to the main road," Owen said, his voice tight with exertion. They had covered about half the distance when a shout indicated they'd been spotted. New gunfire kicked up dirt around them, forcing them to take cover behind a large boulder. "Go," Thornton urged, his face pale from blood loss. "Take Miss Palmer and get those documents to safety." "I'll hold them off." "We're not leaving you," Beatrice insisted, pressing her handkerchief against his wound. "She's right," Owen agreed. "No one gets left behind." The sound of new gunfire reached them, but it was different, more organized, coming from the direction of the main road. A voice called out through a speaking trumpet. "This is Marshal Davis of Oatman. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons." Relief washed over Owen as he recognized the voice of the territorial marshal. Thornton's boy had succeeded in bringing help. The Prescott gang, now caught between Owen's position and the approaching lawmen, began to scatter. 2 tried to make a break for their horses but were quickly cut down by the marshal's deputies. The others, seeing the futility of their situation, threw down their weapons in surrender. As the marshal and his men secured the captured outlaws, Owen helped Thornton to a more comfortable position while Beatrice continued to tend his wound. "You'll be fine," she assured the hotel proprietor. "The bullet passed clean through the muscle. With proper care, you'll be walking normally again within a month." "Where'd you learn about bullet wounds, Miss Palmer?" Thornton asked, managing a pained smile. "My father's medical books," she replied. "I studied them extensively before coming west. I thought such knowledge might be useful." "Lucky for me it was," Thornton said gratefully. Marshal Davis approached their position, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he recognized Owen. "Quinn, should have known you'd be in the middle of this mess. Got yourself in trouble with the Prescott gang, I hear." Owen stood, extending his hand to the marshal. "They wanted what I was carrying, legal documents proving their land claims are based on forged deeds." Davis nodded. "Been trying to build a case against them for months. Those documents will help a great deal." He glanced at Beatrice and Thornton. "Your friends held up well under fire." "They did more than that," Owen said, his gaze lingering on Beatrice. "They saved my life." Beatrice met his eyes, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "We helped each other, Mr. Quinn." The marshal arranged for a wagon to transport Thornton back to Oatman, where the town doctor could properly treat his wound. Owen and Beatrice rode alongside, the danger now past, but the experience having forged a connection between them that neither had expected. As they approached the town, Owen found himself stealing glances at the schoolteacher who had shown such remarkable courage. She rode with the same grace she'd displayed at the dinner table, her back straight and her chin held high despite the ordeal they'd just endured. "Miss Palmer," he said as they neared the outskirts of Oatman, "I believe I still owe you a tour of the schoolhouse." She turned to him, surprise giving way to a warm smile. "I believe you do, Mr. Quinn, although I'm not sure either of us is presentable enough for a proper tour at the moment." Owen looked down at his dust-covered clothes, now additionally stained with Thornton's blood and soot from the lean-to fire. Beatrice was in a similar state, her riding skirt torn at the hem and her blouse smudged with dirt and smoke. "Perhaps tomorrow, then," he suggested. "After we've both had a chance to rest and recover." "Tomorrow would be perfect," she agreed. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but keenly aware of the other's presence. The following morning dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the previous day's heat and danger. Owen had spent the night at the marshal's office, providing a detailed account of the Prescott gang's activities and the documents he carried. The marshal had insisted on keeping the papers in his safe until they could be properly delivered to the territorial court in Prescott. With his official duties temporarily suspended, Owen found himself with an unexpected day of freedom. He used the morning to visit Thornton at the doctor's home, where the hotel proprietor was recovering well. Miss Palmer's diagnosis was spot on, the doctor confirmed. "Clean through the muscle, no bone damage. He'll be hobbling around on crutches by the end of the week." "Good to hear," Owen said, genuinely relieved. "He's a brave man." "So the marshal tells me," the doctor replied. "Says you all put up quite a fight against the Prescott gang, towns talking about nothing else." Owen shifted uncomfortably under the implicit praise. "We did what was necessary." After leaving Thornton with promises to visit again, Owen made his way to the Oatman Hotel. He'd taken extra care with his appearance that morning, visiting the barber for a proper shave and wearing his least worn shirt. His hat, however, remained firmly on his head as he entered the hotel lobby. Beatrice was already waiting, dressed in a simple but elegant day dress of soft green that complemented her eyes. Her hair was once again pinned up neatly, though Owen found himself missing the practical braid she'd worn during their adventure. She smiled when she saw him, rising from her seat in the lobby. "Mr. Quinn, good morning. How is Mr. Thornton?" "On the mend," Owen assured her. "The doctor says he'll make a full recovery thanks in large part to your prompt care." "I'm so glad to hear it," she said, genuine relief in her voice. "Shall we proceed with our tour? I'm quite eager to see my new workplace." Owen offered his arm, which she took with a gracious nod, and they stepped out into the morning sunshine. Oatman was already bustling with activity, miners heading to work and merchants opening their shops. Several townspeople nodded respectfully as they passed, word of their confrontation with the Prescott gang having spread quickly. "You're something of a celebrity now," Owen observed as they walked. The brave schoolteacher who helped capture notorious outlaws before even teaching her first lesson. Beatrice laughed, the sound light and melodious. "Hardly the introduction to the community I had anticipated. I hope it doesn't undermine my authority in the classroom." "On the contrary," Owen assured her. "You've earned their respect. That's no small thing in a frontier town." They continued down the main street, Owen pointing out various establishments and introducing Beatrice to shopkeepers along the way. She greeted each person with genuine warmth, asking questions about their families and particularly about children who might become her students. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a modest but well-constructed building with large windows to admit plenty of light. A small bell tower crowned the roof, though the bell itself hadn't yet been installed. The town council mentioned it was newly built, Beatrice said as they approached. They were quite proud of having raised the funds for a proper school. "They should be," Owen agreed. "Many towns this size make do with far less." He produced a key that the mayor had provided that morning and unlocked the front door, stepping back to allow Beatrice to enter first. The interior was simple but spacious, with rows of newly built desks facing a teacher's platform at the front of the room. Bookshelves, currently empty, lined one wall, and a large blackboard dominated another. Beatrice moved through the space slowly, her fingers trailing along the desks, her expression one of pleased assessment. "It's perfect," she declared finally. "Far better than I had hoped for." Owen watched her, struck by how at home she already seemed in this place. "How many students are you expecting?" "The council mentioned about 20 children of school age," she replied, moving to examine the blackboard. "Though they hope more families with children will settle here once word spreads that Oatman has educational opportunities." "A wise strategy," Owen nodded. "Towns with schools tend to grow more stable over time." Beatrice turned to face him, curiosity evident in her expression. "You seem quite knowledgeable about the development of frontier towns, Mr. Quinn. Is that part of your work with Wells Fargo?" "In a way," he acknowledged. "I've seen many settlements come and go across the territories. The ones that last usually have three things: a school, a church, and a marshal who enforces the law fairly." "And Oatman has all three," she noted. "It does now," he said, his gaze meeting hers directly. A moment of understanding passed between them, acknowledgement that her presence completed an important part of the town's foundation. Beatrice was the first to look away, her cheeks coloring slightly as she moved to examine the teacher's desk more closely. "There's space for a small library here," she observed, changing the subject. "I brought some books with me, but nowhere near enough. I wonder if the town council would approve funds for more." "I'm sure they would," Owen said, stepping closer. "And if not, I know some sources in San Francisco who might donate educational materials." Beatrice looked up at him in surprise. "That would be wonderful, Mr. Quinn, but I was under the impression you were simply passing through Oatman." It was Owen's turn to feel slightly uncomfortable. The truth was, he hadn't given much thought to his next move. The marshal had suggested he remain in town for at least a week, as the territorial judge would want to interview him about the Prescott gang when he arrived for circuit court. "My plans are flexible at the moment," he admitted. "The marshal has asked me to stay until the judge arrives next week." "I see," Beatrice said, her expression carefully neutral. "Well, any assistance you could provide with books would be most appreciated, regardless of how long you remain in Oatman." They continued exploring the schoolhouse, discovering a small anteroom that could serve as Beatrice's personal office and a storage area for supplies. The building also boasted a pot-bellied stove for winter heating and a hand pump outside for water. "The town council has arranged temporary lodging for me at the hotel," Beatrice explained as they exited the schoolhouse. "But they mentioned there's a small teacher's residence being built behind the school. It won't be ready for at least a month, they said. That's not uncommon, Owen noted. Building takes time out here with materials often delayed in transport. They began walking back toward town, the morning having advanced to near noon. Owen was acutely aware that his promised tour was nearly over, and with it, his excuse to spend time in Beatrice's company. Perhaps you might join me for lunch, he suggested as they neared the hotel. That is, if you have no other obligations. I would be delighted, Beatrice replied with a smile that suggested she was equally reluctant for their time together to end. They dined at the hotel restaurant, the same corner table where they'd first met now seemingly reserved for them by unspoken agreement. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they'd read, places they'd traveled, and their differing experiences of life in the East versus the Western territories. What made you decide to come west, Miss Palmer? Owen asked as they lingered over coffee. Teaching positions must be plentiful in Maryland. Beatrice's expression grew thoughtful. After my father passed away last year, there seemed little reason to stay. He always spoke of the West with such admiration, the openness, the possibility, the freedom from old constraints. She paused, looking down at her coffee cup. And truthfully, I was seeking a place where I might be judged by my abilities rather than by my father's reputation or my status as an unmarried woman of a certain age. And have you found that here? Owen asked. She looked up, meeting his gaze. I believe I have. Yesterday, no one questioned my right to ride alongside you and Mr. Thornton or to offer suggestions about our defense. My gender seemed far less important than my willingness to help. That's the way of things out here, Owen agreed. Results matter more than appearances or background, including whether a gentleman removes his hat indoors, Beatrice asked, a teasing glint in her eye as she nodded toward his ever-present Stetson. Owen felt a rush of self-consciousness. In all their interactions, it was the first time she directly referenced his breach of etiquette. Old habits, he said, somewhat gruffly, from your time with the Texas Rangers, she inquired innocently. Owen's surprise must have shown on his face because Beatrice quickly explained, Mr. Thornton mentioned it yesterday when we were waiting in that depression. He said you were one of the best Rangers before joining Wells Fargo. Thornton talks too much, Owen muttered, though without real annoyance. Perhaps, Beatrice conceded, but I found it reassuring to know we were in capable hands. Their eyes met across the table, and Owen felt again that strange connection that had formed so quickly between them. In any other circumstance, with any other woman, he might have dismissed it as the natural result of shared danger. But with Beatrice, it felt like something more, something worth exploring. Would you walk with me this afternoon? He asked suddenly. There's a spot just outside town with a view of the entire valley. It's quite beautiful at sunset. The directness of his invitation seemed to surprise her, but her response came without hesitation. I would like that very much, Mr. Quinn. They agreed to meet again at 4 o'clock, giving Beatrice time to unpack more of her belongings and Owen an opportunity to check on Thornton again. When they reunited later that afternoon, the earlier formality between them had softened. Beatrice had changed into a walking dress of deep blue, practical yet becoming, and had wrapped a light shawl around her shoulders against the cooling air. Owen led her along a well-worn path that wound up a gentle slope to the east of town. They walked side by side, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed, sending a jolt of awareness through Owen each time it happened. The marshal tells me the judge was very pleased to hear about the capture of the Prescott gang, Beatrice remarked as they climbed. Apparently they've been causing trouble throughout the territory for some time. Owen nodded. They started with small land frauds, then graduated to more violent crimes when those proved profitable. Men like that are a threat to everyone trying to build something legitimate out here. Is that what you hope to see, legitimate development of the territories? She asked. I believe in law and order, Owen replied. Without it, only the strong or the ruthless prosper. With it, ordinary people have a chance to build decent lives. A noble sentiment, Beatrice observed. And one I share, though my contribution is somewhat different from yours. Education and law enforcement serve the same end, Owen said. Both help create the kind of society where people can live in peace. They reached the summit of the hill, where a flat outcropping of rock provided a natural viewing platform. The vista before them was breathtaking. The town of Oatman nestled in the valley below, surrounded by rugged mountains that glowed golden in the late afternoon light. Beyond the town, the desert stretched to the horizon, its apparent harshness belied by the subtle beauty of its colors and textures. "Oh," Beatrice breathed, taking in the scene. "It's magnificent, worth the walk," Owen asked, pleased by her reaction. "Absolutely," she affirmed, moving closer to the edge for a better view. They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The air grew cooler, and Owen noticed Beatrice drawing her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Here," he said, removing his coat and draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. "Thank you," she said, smiling up at him. "But won't you be cold?" "I'm accustomed to it," he assured her. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, Beatrice turned to face him. "May I ask you something, Mr. Quinn?" "Of course," he replied, curious about her suddenly serious tone. "Why do you never remove your hat indoors? The real reason, not just old habits." Owen was taken aback by the directness of her question. Few people had ever asked him so plainly, and those who had received only the vaguest of answers. Yet something about Beatrice, her courage, her intelligence, her lack of pretense made him want to offer her the truth. "It was my father's rule," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "He served in the Mexican War, came home with scars both visible and invisible. He taught me that a man's hat was his armor in a dangerous world, and removing it meant letting down your guard." Owen paused, memories of his father's stern face rising unbidden. "He died when I was 15, shot in the back by a man he trusted, a man he'd broken bread with. I joined the Rangers 2 years later, and I've kept my hat on ever since." Beatrice's expression was compassionate, without a trace of the judgment or pity he'd feared. "You honor his memory by keeping his lesson alive," she said softly. "Or perhaps I've simply been afraid all these years," Owen admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "Afraid that letting down my guard means inviting the same fate." "There's wisdom in caution," Beatrice said, "but perhaps not in letting fear dictate every aspect of your life." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Owen felt something shift within him, a loosening of an old, tight-held belief. Without conscious decision, his hands moved to his hat, removing it in one fluid motion. The cool evening air touched his head, a strange but not unpleasant sensation after so many years of constant coverage. Beatrice's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "There you are, Mr. Quinn," she said softly. "It's nice to finally meet you properly." Owen felt oddly vulnerable standing before her hatless, yet at the same time a weight seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. "Owen," he corrected gently, "if we're meeting properly, you should call me Owen." "Owen," she repeated, his name sounding different better in her voice. "And I'm Beatrice, of course." "Beatrice," he echoed, taking a step closer to her. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, the shared danger of yesterday and the quiet intimacy of today creating a connection that neither had anticipated but both now recognized. "It's getting dark," Beatrice observed, though she made no move to leave. "We should probably return to town." "Probably," Owen agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment. Instead of stepping back, he found himself moving closer still until they stood mere inches apart. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he raised his hand to her face, his fingers gently brushing a stray tendril of hair behind her ear. Beatrice's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she lifted her face toward his, a silent invitation that Owen couldn't help but accept. He bent his head, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, then grew more confident as they each responded to the other. When they finally parted, Beatrice's cheeks were flushed, and Owen knew his own face must reflect the same mixture of surprise and pleasure. He hadn't planned this, hadn't even allowed himself to acknowledge the possibility until this moment. "I should apologize," he began, but Beatrice shook her head firmly. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice warm with emotion, "unless you regret it." "Not for a moment," Owen assured her, his hand still cradling her face. They stood together as twilight deepened around them, both aware that something significant had changed between them and within them. "We really should return," Beatrice said eventually, practical concerns reasserting themselves. "People will talk if we're seen coming back after dark." Owen nodded, reluctantly dropping his hand. "You're right. Your reputation as the town's teacher is important." He offered her his arm, which she took without hesitation, and they began the descent toward town. Owen carried his hat in his free hand, not yet ready to replace it on his head. "Will you stay?" Beatrice asked suddenly as they neared the town limits. "After the judge comes, I mean." The question caught Owen off guard. He'd been a wanderer for so long that the idea of staying in one place seemed almost foreign. Yet the prospect of leaving Oatman, of leaving Beatrice, felt increasingly wrong. "I'm not sure Wells Fargo would approve," he said slowly. "My job requires travel." "Of course," Beatrice nodded, a hint of disappointment in her voice despite her clear effort to hide it. "I understand completely." They walked in silence for a few moments before Owen spoke again. "There might be other opportunities here, though." The marshal mentioned needing a deputy with experience. Beatrice looked up at him, hope brightening her expression. "That would suit your skills admirably." "It would mean staying in one place," Owen mused, as much to himself as to her, putting down roots. "A frightening prospect for a man accustomed to the open road," Beatrice observed with gentle understanding. "Terrifying," Owen agreed with a small smile. "Almost as terrifying as removing my hat indoors." Beatrice's laughter rang out in the twilight, a sound Owen realized he wanted to hear much more of in the days and weeks to come. "Yet you managed that feat admirably," she pointed out. "With the right motivation, a man can overcome many fears," Owen said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. They had reached the hotel, the lights from its windows spilling onto the street. The lobby was visible through the front windows, several townspeople gathered there for evening conversations. "I should bid you good night here," Owen said, reluctantly releasing Beatrice's arm. "Less cause for gossip." "Very considerate," she agreed. "Though I find I mind the prospect of gossip less than I might have expected." "Nevertheless," Owen insisted, "your position deserves respect." Beatrice nodded, accepting his judgment on the matter. "Will I see you tomorrow? Count on it," Owen promised. "Perhaps I could help arrange your classroom. I'm handy with tools if anything needs adjusting." "I would appreciate that greatly," Beatrice said with a warm smile. "Shall we say 9 o'clock at the schoolhouse?" 9 o'clock, Owen confirmed. After a moment's hesitation, he bent and placed a quick, chaste kiss on her cheek. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Owen," she replied, her eyes conveying what propriety prevented her from expressing more directly. As she disappeared into the hotel, Owen remained on the street for a moment, his hat still in his hand. Finally, with a small smile, he placed it back on his head and turned toward the marshal's office, where he'd been offered a cot for the duration of his stay. His steps were lighter than they had been in years, his mind already filled with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. Oatman had been just another stop on an endless journey, but now it felt like something else entirely. It felt like a beginning. Over the following week, Owen and Beatrice fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, they would meet at the schoolhouse, where Owen helped prepare the classroom for the upcoming term. He built additional bookshelves, repaired a few wobbly desks, and installed the bell that arrived by stagecoach from Prescott. Their afternoons were often spent in each other's company as well, sometimes walking the perimeter of town, other times sitting in the hotel restaurant discussing books or sharing stories of their respective pasts. In the evenings, they would frequently join Thornton for dinner at the doctor's house, where the hotel proprietor was recovering well enough to entertain visitors. The territorial judge arrived as scheduled, and Owen spent several hours providing testimony about the Prescott gang and the fraudulent land documents. To his relief, the The judge was satisfied with his written statement and saw no need for Owen to travel to Prescott for the trial. "They'll hang for sure," the marshal told him afterward. "Too much evidence against them, especially with those documents you carried." "Good," Owen said simply. "Men like that make it harder for honest folk to build something worthwhile out here." Later that day, Owen found himself in the marshal's office again, but for a different purpose. "I've been giving some thought to your offer," he said, standing before the marshal's desk, "about the deputy position." Marshal Davis leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile crossing his weathered face. "Thought you might. Something or someone giving you reason to stay in Oatman." Owen didn't bother denying it. "I've telegraphed my resignation to Wells Fargo. They've accepted it, effective immediately." "Well then," Davis said, rising to offer his hand. "Welcome to law enforcement in Oatman, Deputy Quinn." The transition from courier to deputy was surprisingly smooth. Owen already knew the basics of the job from his ranger days, and the marshal was an experienced lawman willing to share his knowledge of local customs and personalities. The townspeople, many of whom had heard the story of the confrontation with the Prescott gang, seemed to approve of the appointment. Beatrice, when told of his decision, had responded with a joy that confirmed Owen's hope that she shared his growing feelings. Their relationship, though still proper by public standards, deepened with each passing day. Owen found himself increasingly comfortable removing his hat in her presence, though old habits still prevailed in most public settings. One evening, about 2 weeks after he'd accepted the deputy position, Owen invited Beatrice to dinner at the new restaurant that had opened on the edge of town. It was a slightly more refined establishment than the hotel dining room, catering to the town's growing population of respectable citizens. They were seated at a table near the window, the late summer sunset casting a golden glow over the room. Owen, after a moment's hesitation that Beatrice pretended not to notice, removed his hat and placed it on the empty chair beside him. "The schoolhouse is finally ready," Beatrice said as they perused the limited but promising menu. "Thanks in large part to your help. Classes begin on Monday. Are you nervous?" Owen asked, noting the slight tension in her shoulders. "A little," she admitted. "It's one thing to prepare a classroom, quite another to fill it with children and actually teach." "You'll be wonderful," Owen assured her. "I've watched you organize everything, seen how carefully you've considered each child's needs based on their age and background. You're more prepared than you realize." Beatrice smiled gratefully. "Your confidence means a great deal to me." They ordered their meal's venison steak for Owen, roast chicken for Beatrice, and settled into comfortable conversation about the town's latest developments. A new family had arrived just yesterday, with 3 school-aged children who would join Beatrice's class. The teacher's residence behind the school was progressing well, with walls now fully framed and a roof being added. "The foreman says it should be ready in 2 weeks," Beatrice reported. "Which is fortunate, as the hotel is becoming increasingly crowded with all the new arrivals." "Oatman's growing faster than anyone expected," Owen agreed. "The silver strike up in the North Hills has brought in more miners, and they're bringing families now that the town has proper services." Their food arrived, served by a young woman who had come west with her husband, a carpenter working on several new buildings in town. The meal was excellent by frontier standards, and they lingered over it, neither in a hurry to end the evening. As they finished their coffee, Owen reached across the table to take Beatrice's hand. "There's something I'd like to ask you," he said, his voice more serious than it had been all evening. Beatrice's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded for him to continue. "These past weeks have been unlike anything I've experienced before," Owen began. "I came to Oatman expecting to stay one night. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He paused, gathering his courage, "or more specifically, being anywhere you aren't." A soft blush colored Beatrice's cheeks, but her gaze remained steady on his. "I feel the same way," she admitted quietly, encouraged. Owen continued. "I know it hasn't been long by Eastern standards or any standards, really, but out here, life moves differently. Time means something else when you've faced danger together, when you've seen someone's true character tested." It does, Beatrice agreed, her fingers tightening around his. Owen took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say, perhaps not very eloquently, is that I love you, Beatrice. I love your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. I love the way you've embraced this town and its people. I love the future I can see when I'm with you. Tears had gathered in Beatrice's eyes, but her smile was radiant. Owen, she whispered, I love you too. I came west seeking a new beginning, but I never imagined finding someone like you. Owen reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small box. I've been carrying this for 3 days, waiting for the right moment, he confessed, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. It's not what you might have received back east, but it's perfect, Beatrice interrupted, her eyes shining with emotion. Beatrice Palmer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Owen asked, his heart pounding as if he were facing a band of outlaws rather than the woman he loved. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, Owen Quinn, I will marry you. Owen slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how right it looked there. Then, heedless of the other diners who might be watching, he leaned across the table and kissed her a brief but tender affirmation of the promise they'd just made to each other. When they parted, both were smiling, a shared joy that needed no words to express. The future stretched before them, as vast and full of possibility as the western landscape itself. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Oatman, met with universal approval and more than a little satisfaction from those who had observed their growing closeness. Thornton, now recovered enough to resume his duties at the hotel, insisted on hosting an engagement party the following Saturday. It's the least I can do, he told them when they protested it wasn't necessary. After all, if I hadn't helped Miss Palmer find you that night, who knows if either of you would be here now? The party was a simple but joyous affair, held in the hotel dining room with most of the town in attendance. The mayor made a speech praising both the new deputy and the new teacher for their contributions to Oatman's growth. Marshal Davis offered a toast to their future happiness. Even the territorial judge, passing through on his circuit, stopped by to offer his congratulations. Throughout the evening, Owen kept his hat off, a fact that did not go unnoticed by the townspeople who had grown accustomed to his peculiarity. Beatrice, radiant in a new dress she'd ordered from Prescott, stayed close to his side, her hand often finding his as they accepted good wishes from their neighbors and friends. Later, as the party began to wind down, they slipped outside for a moment of quiet together under the star-filled sky. Happy? Owen asked, his arm around Beatrice's waist as they stood in the hotel garden. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace, though also a bit overwhelmed by all the attention. That's the price of small-town life, he said with a chuckle. No privacy, but plenty of support when it matters. Beatrice nodded thoughtfully. It's different from what I expected, but better in so many ways. I came here hoping to make a difference in children's lives, but I never anticipated how much this place would change mine. Speaking of changes, Owen said, his tone becoming more serious, I've been thinking about the teacher's residence. What about it? Beatrice asked, looking up at him curiously. It seems inadequate for what I hope will be our future, he said carefully. I've been speaking with Mr. Jackson, the land agent. There's a parcel available just outside town with enough space for a proper house. Room to grow, if you will. Beatrice's eyes widened with understanding. Owen, are you talking about building us a home? I am, he confirmed. With your approval, of course. The teacher's residence could be used for a future educator or perhaps converted into additional classroom space as the town grows. I think it's a wonderful idea, Beatrice said, her voice warm with emotion. A home of our own built to our specifications. With a proper library, Owen added, knowing how much that would please her. And maybe a room or two for little Quinns someday. Beatrice's smile was radiant in the moonlight. Someday not too far in the future, I hope. Owen bent to kiss her, his heart full to bursting with love and hope. Whenever you're ready, my love, we have all the time in the world. They were married 3 weeks later in Oatman's small church, with Marshall Davis serving as best man and the doctor's wife standing as matron of honor. Beatrice wore a wedding dress that had arrived by stagecoach just the day before, ordered from a San Francisco dressmaker with the help of Thornton's connections. Owen, dressed in a new suit and polished boots, waited at the altar with uncharacteristic nervousness. When Beatrice appeared at the church doorway, a simple bouquet of desert flowers in her hands, he felt his breath catch. She had never looked more beautiful than in that moment, her face glowing with happiness as she walked toward him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the elderly circuit preacher guiding them through vows that echoed across generations and territories. When the time came to kiss his bride, Owen did so with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened miners in attendance. The wedding celebration that followed was a town-wide affair, with tables set up in the street and food provided by every household. There was dancing to the music of local fiddle players, storytelling, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As the day waned into evening, the newlyweds slipped away to the small house they had rented while their permanent home was being built. It was a modest dwelling, but neatly furnished with items contributed by various townspeople, a handcrafted rocking chair from the carpenter, curtains sewn by the doctor's wife, a sturdy oak bed frame that had been Thornton's wedding gift. Alone at last, Owen took Beatrice in his arms, still marveling that this extraordinary woman was now his wife. "Mrs. Quinn," he murmured against her hair, "I still can't quite believe it." "Believe it," Beatrice replied, reaching up to touch his face gently. "This is real, Owen, we're real." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Beatrice's head resting on his shoulder, Owen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance meeting over a dinner table to facing danger together, from tentative friendship to deepening love, it all seemed both improbable and inevitable. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "About hats," Owen replied with a small laugh. "About how I never took mine off indoors until you sat across my table." Beatrice propped herself up to look at him, her expression curious. "And now I understand what my father never taught me," Owen said, drawing her closer. "That sometimes letting down your guard is the only way to let love in." Beatrice's kiss was her answer, a promise and a benediction all at once. Spring turned to summer and summer to fall as Owen and Beatrice settled into married life in Oatman. Their home on the outskirts of town took shape under the skilled hands of local builders. Guided by designs they had created together, a perfect blend of practicality and comfort. Beatrice's school flourished, her students responding well to her mixture of high expectations and genuine care. Owen's work as deputy kept him busy but satisfied, as the town's growth brought new challenges but also new opportunities for the community. By the time winter arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain to the desert landscape, they had moved into their completed home, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch, and, as promised, a proper library filled with books that Owen had acquired through his connections with freight companies and booksellers across the territory. On Christmas Eve, with a small fire crackling in the hearth and pine boughs decorating the mantel, Beatrice shared news that made Owen's heart soar with joy. "A baby," he repeated, taking her hands in his as they sat together on the sofa. "You're certain?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," she nodded, her eyes shining with happiness. "He estimates the baby will arrive in late June." Owen gathered her in his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family." As they sat together in the warm glow of the fire, planning and dreaming of the future, Owen reflected on how completely his life had changed in less than a year. From a solitary courier with a steadfast rule about keeping his hat on indoors, he had become a husband, soon to be a father, with roots deeply planted in a community he had come to love. All because Beatrice Palmer had sat across his table that fateful evening in the Oatman Hotel. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the desert soil and promising new growth when spring returned. Inside, sheltered in each other's arms, Owen and Beatrice Quinn embraced their shared destiny, their love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them. In the years that followed, Oatman continued to grow, evolving from a mining settlement into a proper town with additional businesses, more families, and even a small newspaper. The Quinn household grew as well with the arrival of Thomas, their son in June as predicted, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Elizabeth after Beatrice's mother. Owen remained deputy marshal, eventually succeeding Davis when the older man retired. Beatrice continued teaching until their second child was born, then focused on raising their family while still contributing to the school through curriculum development and occasional substitute teaching. Their home became a gathering place for the community, a place where newcomers were welcomed, where children came for extra tutoring, where town meetings were sometimes held when more pressing matters couldn't wait for formal arrangements. Through it all, Owen Quinn kept his hat on a peg by the door when he entered his home, a small daily reminder of how one encounter had changed everything. And each evening, when he hung it there and turned to embrace his wife, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led him to Oatman on that particular night, to that particular table, where Beatrice had sat across from him and begun their extraordinary journey together.